Awesome. So welcome to our quiz 2 for DM141 review. Again, this will be the last quiz with DM140, 141. So I know how sad some of you must be not have to take another one of these. But again, this quiz, if you look at the session 8, or excuse me, and the syllabus on session 9, you will see that the quiz 2 covers lessons 12 to 14. And that's actually just the lessons that were from session 6 up to 8. And a few of these sessions, such as with Raw Photopea, we went in depth with some of these tools. And a few of these other ones, such as the the recording actions and batch playing actions, I pushed them into extra credit that we can review. And the main reason is that some of these weren't covered in our projects or capstone projects, and a few of the questions that are on the quiz are just kind of one-off questions with it. And for instance, where is this? The artboards feature. If you take a look at your syllabus in session 7, the artboards is an interesting feature, but we actually don't cover this in Photopea. Photopea doesn't have really a lot of exposure with artboards, so I'm not going to be I'm not going to lecture a ton on something that we haven't done a bunch of. So for those questions, I just went ahead and made it a bit obvious what the information is for them. So don't feel that you will need to memorize all these because the quiz review will the quiz review will help with figuring out those questions. So awesome. So again, I just wanted to make a mention that it's just these 3 lessons here. Nothing too crazy. It's mainly Project 2 and Project 3 that we've worked on, that your quiz will be testing you on. And again, I am going to be uploading the link to this recording here, so you can look at it when you come in. But as you can see here, I did the similar format. As you guys know by now, I just have at the top label for each of these. I think I did them all because I had some information from previous class. Yeah, so essentially, I have one example here. Great, down here, I probably should have put it earlier. But if you see here in your review, I have here an example question from the quiz. And it says here how to create a selection for the specific colors only in Photoshop Photopea. And again, the way that these quiz reviews work, or excuse me, this PDF works, is that if you take a look at a question and it's asking, okay, this is asking how do I create a selection, you could simply go to this quiz review and then look at the titles, and then you can see up here questions on Dodge Sponge Tools and selections. So you could just follow along the path of that one as well. What I would recommend, though, is just take a gander at this before the quiz starts up because it is pretty helpful, and I would just read through it a little bit. There's a lot of information in it, though, so don't overload yourself. But there's a few things that I wanted to take a note of. And one of them is this histogram that you might see a few questions on. There's a few questions asking about what appears when you add in a level adjustment layer. And I'm going to go ahead and open up our Photopea. And let me go ahead and open up an example image here. Actually, let me go ahead and download one really quickly. And again, in the quiz, I don't expect you guys to do this verbatim as to what I'm doing, but I just wanted to show off what each of these, give you an example of what's the questions are asking for. So some of the questions in the quizzes are asking about, okay, how do you get this histogram to appear inside of your Photopea? And the histogram, if you see the word histogram, I would say go to this slide to reread it. But whenever you add in a levels adjustment layer, and that sounds very fancy, but essentially what that is saying is if you're in Photopea and you go to the bottom down here and you have a new adjustment layer, and if you click on that, and then you go up to levels, you'll see that we get this kind of complex looking chart pop up for us. And what the levels adjustment layer is, the questions in the quiz are asking about is how do you get this to appear? Well, we just did it. We went to new adjustment layer levels. And then it's also asking you about these tree squares here. So if I go ahead and drag this square over, you'll notice that it does different items to our image. It deals with the darkness of the image. Now, the quiz asks for more specific terminology. So for our review, I simply went ahead and split up these squares for us to look at as well. The right white square is used for the highlights in the image. That means that if I make this a bit lower, the image gets less highlighted. If I make it a bit larger, the highlights pop out a bit more. If you see here, the left black square is responsible for the shadows. So the darkness in the image gets a lot darker if I make the shadows darker here with this square. But if I make it a bit larger and able to put it to the sides there, I'm able to make the overall image a bit brighter. And then this middle one here that's a bit confusing looking is responsible for gamma or midtones, essentially saying if it's not white or black, it's going to be responsible to this gray square. So you can make the image a bit brighter or darker as you see fit. But essentially the questions on these ones are just asking about what each of these squares do. And I went ahead and just set it up for you guys here so that the right square is for your highlights, left square is for your shadows, and the middle is for your gamma or midtones. Now, I don't want anyone to be too confused about the terminology because the histograms and stuff are a bit confusing when you look at them first. But I just wanted to, I wanted to go over how you can add in this adjustment layer. As you can see here again, layer, new adjustment layer levels. And there's actually a few trick questions on this exam. So make sure that you always ask me a question if you're not too certain about a question. Or also right here, for instance, one of the questions says you add a histogram into your project by adding hue or saturation adjustment layer. And we know that's not true because if we add in a hue or saturation adjustment level, we don't get a histogram. We just get something that we can move in a chart. But when we add in the levels, we get the histogram pop up. Now, again, I don't want to be confusing anyone with this stuff. I would say for the quiz, just looking at the question and double checking on the slides is okay to do as well. But I wanted to go into some detail about some of these areas here. Another area that there's a lot of questions on, and some of these are just literally from knowing it as well, is raw photopea or raw images. And again, I'm going to go ahead and download our raw file here. And in Project 3, if you did Project 3, you should be in good shape for, I would say, a majority of the questions in the quiz because it is involved with just Project 3's terminology. So again, I downloaded in a raw image. It's on my other screen, but I dragged it into here, and you'll see that I get a pop-up called raw photopea. Now, the main thing about raw photopea that the questions ask as well is that there's two types of references here. One of them is called white balance, and the other one is called raw photopea. So what I would say is that if you're ever given a question about either white balance or raw photopea in this quiz, I might put these slides to be one after the other. Go ahead and take a look at slides 2 or the slides titled Questions on White Balance tool. And the white balance tool, again, its references the tool in photo or in the quiz. It's not usually referred to that. If you see up here at the top, we have temperature and tint, and this will be determining the white balance in our image. So if you're confused about why is it being called the white balance tool, I never heard of that tool yet, just remember that in raw photopea, when you drag a raw file in, these two items up here, temperature and tint, are essentially your white balance tool. So don't think that there's another tool out there that we're using. This is simply saying raw photopea's white balance tool. Now, to determine the white balance in your image, the two features that you need are temperature and tint. Temperature and tint. I'm getting tongue twisted there. And exposure and contrast are usually just given as an option. But I would say for your quiz, one of the questions is asking about what the the main features of your white balance tool are. And that will be temperature and tint. Now again, the questions on raw photopea are more factual, meaning that they're not so much in your photopea practice or projects, more so than just standing for stuff. What I mean by that is one of the questions is asking about what Nikon cameras extensions are. So I went ahead and just provided them as .nef. But if you remember, you could also take a look at the syllabus as well. Should be up there. Let me see if this works. Great. So I'll go ahead and add this into the slides as well. I apologize for not doing that. But if you ever wanted to take a look at all the types of raw formats in Photopea, the 4 main ones are DNG, NEF, CR2, and ARW. Now, again, you don't need to memorize these because I'll have them provided in the slides for us. But what I would say is that if you're ever given a question and you see the words raw Photopea in it or raw image, go ahead and go to this slide, as it will contain information for you about those aspects of Photopea. And again, the main thing that I want to know, or excuse me, that I want to iterate about raw Photopea or raw images is that they contain unprocessed data from a digital camera sensor. So you can kind of think of it as the camera as an image in its purest form, because it hasn't been distilled or modified by these other features that we have. And the reason that we're able to open up raw Photopea is because this is a raw format file, so we're able to modify it a bit more. That's the main difference of raw Photopea. Again, it doesn't go any much further than that. I do have a little tidbit here about the advantages, but again, if you're just looking for the questions and stuff, you could just go to this slide here. Now, there's a few questions on JPEGs and PNGs. We've been using them since DM140, and now we're getting asked questions about them. The main thing I want to show off is that JPEG stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group. That's just one question that is kind of added in there, and it's just kind of factual. So I just went ahead and gave you guys that one. And the main thing I want to show off is that JPEG and PNG are not raw file formats. So these are files that have been modified. And if you open up a JPEG in Photopea, you won't get access to raw Photopea. So this won't be here. If you open up a raw file in Photopea, you'll get raw Photopea. So the main differences between JPEG, PNG, and your NEF, CRW stuff is that these are not raw and these are raw. Now, the white balance tool again, actually, I might edit this to make it a bit more sense. The white balance tool, I really want to reiterate, is referencing the temperature and tint control that we have inside a raw Photopea. And again, the main areas of why we use the white balance tool is we're just trying to find a good neutral color for our image. And you did that in Project 3 quite a bit as well. But there's just some information containing this as well. There's also, if you take a look at the link I added in here, there's a cool little, well, I might think it's cool. You guys might not think it's cool. But it's just an interesting little article on white balance. And as you can see here, this image has white balance changed. So the temperature and tints are modified throughout this image. And you can see in the background how it changes a bit, right? So it gets really bright over here, but it gets pretty dark over there, but it's the same image. So again, that just has to do with the neutral colors. Let's see here. And a few of these questions are pretty straightforward in the quiz. For instance, one of the questions is, how do you rasterize an object to a smart object? I just went ahead and added in the information for that. But again, feel free to have Photopea open during your quiz. And then trying to figure out, all right, how do I rasterize? And then going from there. Now, there's a few questions on frames that I want to cover. Or excuse me, the main thing that I want to show off about frames, if you ever get any question about frames, are these two first bullet points here. Is that a frame is a special placeholder containing imported graphics, and that a frame can be made of any shape. So if you remember when you're clipping in your photos in your capstone project of your food into those shapes are your frames. So you can make the shape to be anything you'd like, and it doesn't have to be restricted. Let me go ahead and
Photoshop's frame tool.
Great. And there is also a little video here as well on YouTube. You don't need to watch this one.
Allows you to easily pierce
the frame. It's just an interesting way
well as
to look at the frame tools and see what they're doing as well. Now, the issue that I have with the frame tool, or not that I have, is that Photopea is a bit behind in Photoshop in some areas. So we don't have access to all of these tools. So if you're ever confused on a tool that you haven't used yet during this quiz, just let me know, because it could be specific to Photoshop. But if the tool is specific to Photoshop, the answer should be in the slides. I'm not going to make you guys figure that stuff out on your own. But feel free to ask me if you're a bit stuck on any of these. Now, I haven't covered this yet because it is in the extra credit, but there's something called actions. And the main thing that I wanted to show off about actions in Photopea is that actions are a recorded set of events that we can just play back on different images. The second main thing I want to show off is that actions are not obsolete, and I think they should be used more often. But I also want to show off later on how we can go about creating actions and how you can do that for your extra credits. But for right now, all you would need to know about actions for the quiz is that they're not obsolete. You can find the actions panel by going to the window actions down here. And essentially what they are is you're recording the steps you're doing in your project so you can play them again at a different time. Now, there's one more thing that is in Photoshop more prevalently than Photopea, and they are artboards. And, oh, I just quit out of my slides there. If you go ahead and go to the link I provided inside of this slide down here, today's, let me go back down here, on the actions, or excuse me, on questions on artboards. If you take a look at this link, essentially what artboards are different versions for our project. So you can see here, this person has 4 different layouts for their items. So there's 4 different artboards. And this is similar to what we did with our wireframes, right? We had the same project, but we had 3 different wireframes with it kind of moved around and looking a bit different. So essentially the main thing about artboards is that you can create multiple canvases with them and change around the format during exporting with them as well. Now again, artboards is more heavily into the realm of Photoshop, so we haven't done too much with it because we're more using Photopea. But please reference the artboards slide if you ever see a question on it, but there should only really be one question on it, and this first bullet point should be helpful enough to answer that question. Great, so I covered this a bit earlier. This is your histograms and levels, where, again, very quickly, the levels is an adjustment layer that brings up a histogram. The breakdown of that histogram is right here. So all you will really need for any of those questions is on this slide as well. Now, I covered a few of these before with the selections and other tools. But again, the main thing that I wanted to show off is also I wanted to reference these guys down here, the dodge and sponge tools. The sponge tool essentially adjusts the saturation of an image as we draw with it, and the dodge tool adjusts the exposure of an image as we draw with it as well. And I'm going to go ahead and just grab the dodge tool here. I'm going to make it a bit bigger. And what the dodge tool does, it says, is adjust the exposure as we're drawing. So if I'm going to start drawing with my dodge tool, does everyone see how it's getting a bit brighter here? This means that we are exposing the image so that we're making it a bit brighter, and overall the exposure of the image is increased. Now the dodge tool, that was the dodge tool, the sponge tool adjusts the saturation. And if you remember, the saturation is what we use when we want items to pop out a bit more. So if I go ahead and pick the saturation of this colored roof a bit more, do you see how it's a bit more red than it used to be? You can see there, it just makes colors pop out a bit more. And very interesting tool that's helpful if you just want to put a few different tweaks onto an image. But again, the main purpose of me showing this off isn't for you guys to memorize. I just wanted to show off what some of the questions will be on the quiz. And again, you have full access to these slides during the quiz too. I think this is an older video, so I'll need to change that up. But essentially, these slides contain the majority of the information you'll need to succeed in the quiz. I would say read through it a few times. If you're stuck on a question or anything, please let me know. I'm going to go ahead and make the white balance and raw photopea a bit more understandable with some images too. But I would say if you go ahead and take a look at these slides and ask me questions during quiz 2, you should be good to go for the quiz there. Awesome. And again, for some of these questions, such as artboard or frames, because they're more heavily in the field of Photoshop over Photopea, I would say don't be too worried if we haven't seen them too often. Photopea is trying to catch up, but sometimes we don't have access to all the same resources or tools. So you can always ask me questions about that as well. But don't feel that you'll need to learn a ton of new stuff with this. These slides on artboards and frames should be enough to help you succeed in the quiz.